Our first question for today, Brother Satak from Indonesia emails and asks about the ruling of nutmeg in Islam, because he says that he uses it regularly in his cuisine and spices, and yet he just heard a fatwa that says that it is haram.
وما أرسلنا من قبلك إلا رجالا نوحي إليهم فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون.
So, this is a spicy question, inshallah, pun intended. Nutmeg is, of course, the name given to the seed of a particular plant. Its biological name is, and I'm going to butcher the name here, Myristica fragrans, which is mainly harvested in Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest exporter of nutmeg, and so our brother Satak is emailing from Indonesia. And, of course, it's also produced in India to a lesser degree, and other places. And it is used as a spice or a flavoring in many cultures, and in particular the Southeast and Southeast Asian cultures, so India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and of course Indonesia, Malaysia, especially in these, but also even in the Western cultures. Even there's a famous drink here that is done in Western lands that involves nutmeg and whatnot. So it's a very common spice here, and the term for nutmeg in Arabic is jawzat al-tib, and is also called jawz al-hind as well, ascribed to India, even though it does not typically originate from India, meaning it's not the main source. However, in the good old days, spices would go through India and then reach the Silk Route, and so nutmeg in particular, it would be grown in India, but it would be brought from Indonesia and other places, and then it will be spread, and so it was called jawz al-hind, basically the seed coming from Hind. And also, by the way, just FYI, according to many historians, nutmeg was one of the main factors that Europeans wanted to discover the direct route to India. So Christopher Columbus, his journey was because of nutmeg. Well, nutmeg and spice, and nutmeg and also pepper and salt. They wanted direct access. So nutmeg actually played a very big role in the incentive for Europeans to try to discover, as they call the New World. Anyway, that's all about the spice of nutmeg. Now, what is the problem? Why would our brother ask the issue of nutmeg? Well, the fruit, or the seed of nutmeg, it's not a fruit, it's a seed. The seed of nutmeg, it has a compound called myristicin, and this compound, if it is ingested in a particular concentration and in its pure form, it can produce effects that are hallucinogenic, i.e. the same types of effects that happens when you drink alcohol, when you drink khamr, wine or whatnot, or if you take some types of drugs or whatnot. So this seed, if it is ground and ingested in a particular manner with a particular purity and a particular concentration, it can produce hallucinogenic effects. However, if it is used as a regular spice, if it is cooked in a small quantity and mixed with food and used in the regular cuisines around the globe, then in fact it produces a very nice flavor, which any of us who have eaten, and I myself have eaten nutmeg plenty of times, obviously, that we are very familiar with. And these types of food items, no matter how much you eat that food item, whether it is a drink, whether it is a spice, whether it is a curry, that if you were to eat that or drink the substance in large quantities, nothing would happen, because it is used as a spice. And so therefore you have the same substance. One aspect of it, its primary usage is for spices, and it's a very nice spice, and it is an international spice. And it is also possible to derive from the same substance something which is without a shadow of a doubt haram, because it is hallucinogenic. And there are people, and there are cultures even, but it's very rare, that use nutmeg to produce that hallucinogenic effect. And it is something that is it is done in acts of desperation, when people don't have access to actual, let's say, the hardcore drugs, or they don't have access to alcohol, and they do have access to nutmeg, and they are addicted, and they need to get that high. So there are ways to do it. Again, it's not something, no need to teach you all of this, and not that I'm an expert, alhamdulillah, But my point is that there are ways to use the same substance to produce that hallucinogenic effect. So therefore, what will the ruling be? So this topic or this issue of nutmeg, it is not something new. It is something that has been discussed since the very beginning of its discovery amongst the Arab and the Muslim populations. And therefore, we do have a number of early ulama, medieval ulama actually, not early because again, by the time this, so I classify ulama into, early and medieval and pre-modern and modern. There's four large categories you can say. So the ulama of the earliest phases, but generally speaking, nutmeg hadn't reached Arabian lands at that time. However, we do find discussions of this Jawzat al-Tib or Jawzat al-Hind it is called. We do find fatawa from ulama from more than 1,000 years ago. And it is true to state that quite a lot of them did view nutmeg to be in the same category as those substances that cause iskar, that cause sukr, or which is basically intoxication. And so they lumped it together with alcohol. And therefore, to be precise, therefore, the question of nutmeg actually is a very interesting discussion about the types of substances according to the classification of the Sharia when it comes to haram or halal. And if you were to consider anything that intoxicates, no matter how it is, whether it's liquid or solid, and whether it is ingested in small quantities, it becomes a spice. If you were not care about any of this, and you were to consider all such substances to be khamr, then you would apply the ruling of khamr to nutmeg. What is the ruling of alcohol? What is the ruling of vodka, of wine? What is the ruling of gin, of beer? Our Prophet ﷺ said, "Ma askara kathiruhu faqaliluhu haram." That which intoxicates in large quantities will be haram in small quantities. Now, this is the ruling that is given to alcoholic drinks. And therefore, if 5-10 glasses of beer intoxicates an average person, then one drop of beer to add to your food for the sake of that beer, it would be considered haram. And this is the fatwa of quite a number of ulama. And in fact, even if you log on online in Arabic or English fatwa, you will come across a number of ulama that have said nutmeg is haram based upon this principle. And this is not a strange or unique or bizarre fatwa. This is a mainstream traditional fatwa, and there's nothing wrong with this fatwa. And one of the great scholars of our medieval tradition, Ibn Hajar al-Haythami, who died 974 Hijrah, so 600 years ago, 500 something years ago, he was asked about nutmeg, and he said that the scholars of Mecca and Medina and the scholars of Egypt have differed over nutmeg. So this is now a controversy taking place. So the controversy is now taking place. This is now the time that nutmeg is spreading in Muslim lands. And so you have various groups of ulama. So groups are allowing it, groups are not allowing it. And then he himself said that I like to follow Ibn Daqiq al-Eid's fatwa, which is another great Shafi'i scholar, who said that it is muskira. It is the same ruling as alcohol. And another great scholar, Ibn al-Imad, he said that just like hashish, just like the drug hashish, it is haram, so too nutmeg is going to be haram. And he then quoted the hadith, kullu muskirin khamr wa kullu khamrin haram. Anything that intoxicates will be called a khamr, and every khamr is haram. So this is the fatwa of Ibn Daqiq al-Eid and of Ibn al-Imad and of Ibn Hajar al-Haythami. This is not, by the way, the Ibn Hajar al-Hafidh al-Asqalani who commented on Fath al-Bari. This is another Ibn Hajar who's called Ibn Hajar al-Haythami. There's two famous Ibn Hajars. There's 100 years between them. So the point being, you do have that fatwa and you find it online. No problem. Is this the only fatwa? No. There are a number of other ulama who looked into this deeply, and they said, and this is the key point here, that nutmeg does not fall under muskir. It doesn't come under that which is intoxicating. Rather, it comes under something else called mukhaddir, or they say mufattir, or they say mufsid. So there are, and again, this is a much more advanced topic. I'm not going to go into all of this. Some ulama categorize such substances into one. That's muskir. Others say, no, there's two. Others say three. Others say four. So here's the point. How do you categorize all of these substances? That will then make your distinction of the fatwas, that not all of these substances are the same. And a number of great ulama said that these types of substances that are used as spices in some areas, and perhaps as types of drugs in others, they cannot take the ruling of the muskir, especially because they are not something that the Sharia has come explicitly forbidding. So we look at other factors as well. The Sharia has forbidden khamr, and khamr is a type of drink that has alcohol in it. As for mukhaddir, then the mukhaddir is typically a solid substance that affects the body by bringing about a sense of lethargy, or also sometimes bringing about ecstasy. As for mufattir, this is something that brings about, generally speaking, a type of sleepiness, or even a mufsid is that which basically knocks you unconscious. And according to another group of scholars, amongst them is the famous Imam al-Ramli and the Maliki scholar al-Qarafi in his book al-Furuq, which is a very encyclopedic book that he talks about the differences between that which might be considered the same. He goes, no, there are actually differences. So he says difference number 40 is between the muskirat and the mukhaddirat. He goes, these are not the same categories. And he says that that those substances in which there is a need to use them not for pleasure, but for some medicinal purposes, let's say, okay, and the body finds a healing mechanism through them, do not take the same verdict as alcohol. And he gives a number of examples. And he also, and this fatwa, by the way, is not something new. Imam al-Ramli was asked about nutmeg, and he wrote a fatwa in his famous book al-Fatawa, in which he said that it is allowed to ingest nutmeg if it is done in small quantities. However, if it is done in large quantities, then it becomes haram. Why is this distinction made? This distinction is made because the concept of mukhaddir is not the same as that of muskir. And the reason for this is the following, that there are many differences between the mukhaddir category and the muskir category. For example, the punishment for drinking alcohol, which is the lashes in the Sharia, will not be applied to somebody who takes, for example, nutmeg. It's not the same punishment for the sake of high. I'm saying if he takes it for the sake of becoming high, that punishment will not apply. As well, the issue of najasa, nutmeg is not najis. However, according to many scholars, khamr is najis. Now again, the position that I hold is that khamr is not najis, and we talked about that maybe another lecture. I know I gave a longer lecture about this, but the point is they distinguish between mukhaddir and muskir, and they said mukhaddir is not najis, whereas muskir is najis, and other punishments as well that differ between mukhaddir and muskir. So the point being, what this group of scholars said is the following. They said those substances that are solid and that do affect the body, we look at the goal and the purpose of those substances. If it is done for the sake of the same high, the same hallucinogenic effects that khamr produces, then it is haram. However, if it is done for medicinal purposes, or if it is done for a spice and it does not have the hallucinogenic effects, then in this case, this group of scholars argues that the mukhaddir does not take the ruling of the muskir. And this is the fatwa that I personally follow, because it is the common sense and it is the logical one, and it is one that confirms with the goals of the Sharia. And I'll give you some simple examples. So what do we do when we need to take a substance to numb a part of the body for an operation? What do we do when we need to knock ourselves out for an operation? The person will give us that substance, and it is, of course, sometimes it could be a liquid, sometimes it could be, inhaled or whatnot. Now, these types of substances affect the mind. So morphine is a good example, right? What do you do when somebody is in pain and he has to be given morphine? And morphine does have a type of ecstatic effect. However, that's not the primary goal. That's not the intention. The intention is to numb the pain. The same goes for those things that, analgesics for example, or those things that will cause us to go to sleep for the sake of an operation. Generally speaking, we are not allowed to ingest or inhale substances that are going to interfere with our minds. Yet, it is allowed before an operation to, knock a person out and to ingest or to inhale or to put this liquid into the person's body. Why? Because this is not of the muskirat. It is not taken for pleasure. It's not taken to produce a high. It's not taken to escape from the problems of this world. Because that's what people do when they want to get drunk. They want to escape from the problems of this world, and they want to produce this temporary high that causes them to feel that ecstasy, that euphoria, that hallucinogenic effects. They're daydreaming and they're in a type of phase or whatnot. That type of pleasurable ecstasy which serves no purpose and it harms the body and the soul, it is haram in all circumstances. However, what if the substance is taken for another purpose and not for that ecstatic purpose? Now, if the substance is khamr, there is no leeway, because the sharia has come with khamr, forbidding khamr, and the hadith forbids khamr. And our Prophet ﷺ said, it is not a cure, it is the disease itself. There is no cure in khamr itself. You don't drink vodka or gin or beer or wine for any medicinal purposes, and one drop added to your food will make it haram. Does nutmeg take the same ruling? Some group of scholars says yes it does, and another group says no it doesn't. And they said those who ingest nutmeg in those quantities, because it requires a much larger quantity. So FYI, many cultures use nutmeg, as I said, is something that is done around the globe, and none of the items, the food and drink items that are consumed around the globe, when they are produced properly, none of them causes any effects. There's no hallucinogenic effects. I mean, children eat these food items, and adults and pregnant ladies and elderly people, they eat and drink from these nutmeg products and nothing happens. In fact, I guarantee you, many of you watching this YouTube video right now are actually shocked to discover that nutmeg is a hallucinogenic substance. It can be used as one. It's not the primary purpose, and the majority of people who have it in their shells don't even know that it is potentially hallucinogenic, because when you buy it from the stores, by the way, it's actually diluted, and it's something that you really have to go a little bit crazy and overboard to become hallucinogenic off of the product that you buy. If you wanted to do that, you would get the actual nut and you would ground it in a particular manner, particular concentration. Those people who know, and the end product that we buy from the market is actually very different, and it is very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's very difficult to use that substance to become high, and therefore, and also, by the way, those who are wanting to go down that route, they don't use nutmeg because there are so many other substances that are easier, accessible, and do the job better. Nutmeg is only done, by those people who are so desperate and they don't have any other alternative, and they figure out how to do it. Otherwise, it is not something that is resorted to. Therefore, the bottom line, there is a good position, a solid position, that considers nutmeg to be the same ruling as alcohol, and so they would say that the small and the large of it is haram, and that is a respectable position. It is backed by the generalities of the concept of muskir and the qiyas, or the analogy of nutmeg being the same category as the muskirat, or as the alcoholic drinks. However, there is another position which is also mainstream, and it is also early Islam, or medieval Islam, and it is also something that our earlier scholars of 500 years ago discussed, and I would say the majority of researchers who understand food and medicine and modern science in our times, the majority of scholars who have a chemical background seem to sympathize with the fatwa that nutmeg is not the same as alcohol. And I'll give you a number of examples. So there was a very well-attended, very large conference that took place in Kuwait 20 years ago in 1995 that was done under the organization of the Islamic Conference, one of the largest fiqh councils of the world, the Nadwa, the Fiqhiyya, the medical Nadwa Fiqhiyya, the 8th council, and they discussed a number of things, and they said the mukhaddir, generally speaking, are haram, except if it is done for medicinal purposes, for a need, and for the level that is needed. In other words, there's got to be a need, and the level has to be appropriate for what you are doing. And then in the same fatwa, they said, and there is no sin on using jawzat at-tayyib, which is nutmeg, in order to affect the flavoring of the food if it is done in small quantities, as long as that quantity does not bring about a sense of euphoria or ecstasy or induce hallucinogenic effects. End fatwa. So this is a fatwa from one of the largest fiqh councils of the world, and generally speaking, these fiqh councils, they bring experts and specialists, and they bring people who know these matters better than, because again, there is an element of chemistry that is involved, there's an element of fully understanding the realities of these substances, and of course, because of this, we do have this debate or controversy on so many issues between generic scholars who, they have a good understanding of the Sharia, but maybe not fully aware of the specifics of what they're talking about, versus those who have other specialities. Another great scholar who is a member of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, one of the largest fiqh councils of the world. He is actually the president currently, Dr. Ali Muhyiddin al-Qurradaghi, very great alim, and also one of the senior ulama. He actually has taken over from Shaykh al-Qardawi, the fiqh council, and he has a fatwa as well about nutmeg, and he says that the usage of nutmeg is permissible if it does not lead to a state of ecstasy or euphoria, and it is used in a small quantity for food in order to bring about the taste. However, if it is done for other than this, if it is done for euphoria or ecstasy, then it is not going to be permissible. End quote. And the great scholar Shaykh Wahba al-Zuhaili, who has written many volumes of fiqh, and his most famous work, Al-Fiqh al-Islami wa Dillatu, which is a multi-volume work which goes over all of the issues of fiqh in a very contemporary manner, and it is an encyclopedic reference for every single student of knowledge. I use this book also a lot all the time. Shaykh Wahba al-Zuhaili gave a fatwa about this, that لا مانع من استعمال القليل من جوزة الطيب لإصلاح الطعام والكعك ونحوه ويحرم الكثير لأنها مخدرة. There is no problem in using a small quantity of nutmeg to bring about a change in the flavor of a food or a cake or anything of this nature, and it is not allowed to ingest a large quantity because it will become a mukhaddir. So Dr. Wahba al-Zuhaili and the Fiqh Council and Dr. Ali Muhyiddin al-Qurradaghi, and before them Shaykh al-Ramli, and before them al-Qarrafi, and all of them, they basically said that nutmeg is not the same as alcohol, and the same goes for many other substances that come under this category, that they do have a purpose that is not hallucinogenic, that is not meant to induce a euphoria, and that purpose is halal. It could be medicine or it could be flavoring. As long as it does not produce that effect, then it is permissible to use in that realm. It does not take the ruling of khamr. And this is also the fatwa of the Darul Ifta of Egypt, which is one of the senior, in fact it is the senior fiqh council of Egypt, composed of many ulama of the Al-Azhar University in particular. And so the official fatwa of the Dar al-Ifta is that nutmeg is allowed in small quantities for cooking, and this is also the fatwa of the Fatwa Council of Jordan as well, that they too have given a fatwa in this regard. Now again, as we are aware, usually that's why we ask these questions, generally speaking, the questions I do would have some back and forth. Otherwise, if something has been unanimously agreed upon, generally speaking, there's no question about this. So our brother was using nutmeg, and he came across a fatwa that says it is haram, so this confused him. And I conclude by stating that is a legitimate and valid fatwa. We respect the ulama who said that, and there's no problem to follow that fatwa. However, there are many ulama, dare I say, that in our times, those who understand the science of these products, and those who understand the chemical nature of food products and of herbal substances, generally speaking, we find that they do not agree with this somewhat simplistic notion of viewing all food categories that might potentially affect the mind to be the same as the category of khamr or alcohol. No, khamr is a category, and so the muskir, which is liquid intoxicants that have alcohol, is one category, and mukhaddir is another category, and we can even say mufattir is yet a third category. There should be at least three categories if you ask me, but anyway, that is a more longer topic. In a nutshell, pun intended, inshallah ta'ala, nutmeg is halal when it is used for the sake of your spices and your food. And if somebody uses it for other than that and to produce hallucinogenic effects, then there is no question that it would become haram, and it would take the ruling of all other types of drugs that are taken for hallucinogenic effects and for ecstasy, and the sin would be upon that person. That does not negate the fact that it is permissible to use nutmeg for halal, and that is the default of what mankind uses it for, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
يا من أجبت دعاء نوح فانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا بقولك كن